Now let's talk a little bit more about Alpha and the Omega and verse 13. I've talked about before how the discussion in this text and the change in verse 16 to I, Jesus, matches the identical speech pattern of Revelation 1:4, where I, John, follows immediately after Alpha and the Omega, the one who is and who was and who is coming. You can see the prior videos on Alpha and Omega for that information, or look in the description below. I put a link to a written discussion that I'm going to reference real briefly here, because before we get into it, we're just going to take a quick look at some more text in Revelation 22. As many of you know, I've written several books and several editions of one book. We're not going to read from this. I'm just going to show you right here on page 181 from this point forward all the way down to here, really to the end of the section. So several pages I spend of text and time showing you the narrative changes and who's talking and when and why. But I'm going to do it now in a very brief fashion. But I encourage you to take a look at this discussion in the link below for more information. Okay, so we're going to switch over to a reading of Revelation 22, just a couple extra texts, okay? Now, as you know, I haven't translated all of them. So we've been going through the day text based on what I have translated. So when I am going to read some text that I haven't translated, and some of these I have, it's just, here I'm going to read from the NWT because it will show continuously Revelation 22 in case I read over parts that I haven't done or refer to them, like verse 16. So let me bring you guys in here. You can follow along as well. If you have a copy of the Bible that has Revelation 22, most do, unless it's a Jewish Bible, then you'll be able to find. This is the day text reading. You can find the description below, but it only has verses 10 through 15. So I'm going to set that over here. Go back to Revelation 22, NWT. Now, let me just bring this in a little bit more so you can see Rev. Okay. Let me show you why. Remember I said at the outset, I said that in verse 10, or let's see, what was the reading? Oh, it's NWT, so it's different. That's why I'm looking at thinking, wait a minute, it's in the day text it says the one speaking to me, but then I was switching over to the NWT. So from our day text, as you know, I said earlier that in verse 10, the one speaking to me, to John, is an angel. And so why do I say that? Well, all right, so let's take a look at a little bit more of Revelation. Starting in verse 1, you notice it says, he, okay, we'll get to the person showing John these things in a moment. He showed me a river of water of life. And then it describes it more. We did this reading. It talks about, so this is the description. They will see his face. His name will be on their foreheads. Night will be no more. Okay, then it says in verse 6, he said to me, these words are faithful and true. Lord God of the inspired expressions sent his angel to show his slaves what must take place. I am coming quickly. Look, there's no break here, right? He said to me. So he's still speaking. The one who showed him the river of life, and who he refers to here as he said to me. These words are faithful and true. I am coming quickly. Happy is anyone observing the prophecy, words of the prophecy of this scroll. Who do you think this is? I think it's an angel. Why? Look at verse 8. Well, I, John, and again, as I said before, it's the only difference between this and some of the other texts is that it provides a variant form of Kai and ego, and it combines them as kago, so and I, but really it's the first person pronoun I, very similar to what you see in verse 16, but which is identical in Revelation 1:4, identical to verse 16. I talked about this in prior Alpha and the Omega shows. But notice John responds to the one who's saying these things to me, right, and says, I am coming quickly. John was the one hearing and seeing these things. He says, I, John, and he says, when I heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel that had been showing me these things. The angel is the one who just said this. I am coming quickly. And who's been talking to John the whole time, or at least one of them. What does the angel say? He says to me, unlike the prince of the army of Jehovah, when Joshua fell down on his face, this angel says, be careful, do not do that. All I am is a fellow slave of you and of your brothers who are prophets and of those observing the words of this scroll. Worship God. He also tells me, the one who just told him, I am coming quickly. He's speaking for God and Jesus, as I've said consistently in all of our day texts and Alpha and Omega videos. He also tells me, verse 10, do not seal up the words of the prophecy. Then this is our reading, right? Look, I am coming quickly. The same one who's been showing him these things the whole time, who in verse 7 said, I am coming quickly, and to whom John then fell down to worship, the angel, but who said, don't do that. Why? Because he's talking for other people, God and Jesus, the ones who sent him. That's why he can say, I am coming quickly, and the reward I give. Now you see why John would do this, right? John is thinking, well, he's acting the same way that people like Joshua and Manoah and his wife acted. It's just, this isn't Michael. This isn't Jesus. This is an actual messenger angel talking exactly like God and Jesus. And that's why John started to worship him. And he goes on right after telling him not to do that, and who he is, fellow slave and an angel. John says the angel that was talking to him. Right after that angel tells him who he is and says, don't do that. That same angel, he also tells me, verse 10, look, I am coming quickly, and the reward I give is with me to render to each one as his work is. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And then notice the angel goes on and talks the whole way through the end of our reading. Right after that angel speaks for God in these ways, and possibly Jesus, verse 16, I, Jesus, sent my angel. Jesus hasn't been talking. The one who's been talking is identified right here. And yet we have Trinitarian apologetic nuts out there running around destabilizing people's faith because they can't handle the text. They can't handle what it's teaching. Jesus is not good enough for them unless he's the Alpha and the Omega. You understand what I'm saying? They cannot accept this kind of angelic representation, even if it is stated for us in those very words in the text, I, Jesus, sent my angel. Even if it says God gave Jesus a revelation, they're going to say he still had it. He still knew all that stuff from all eternity, or they gave it to his human nature. And, he's not two persons in one. He's still one. He's just got two natures, and one knows everything, and the other doesn't, right? All the retarded stuff, all the contradictory things you would expect from people who are not teaching these things. And that's what gets me so fired up. I have to spend all this time, write all this stuff, and I get all these Trinitarian nuts and people who just can't take the time and read the text like we just did. And that's why I tell you all regularly to be careful with your time. Otherwise, you'll get frustrated like me thinking about these things when we should be talking about the words of the prophecy of this scroll. Because the appointed time is near. These are Trinitarian nuts who have lost touch with the text and who keep promoting this false view of a triune God that's inconsistent with the text, and then mislead people and argue with them about the metaphysics they barely understand, if at all, because we don't even really understand it all. They're focusing on those things and putting other people down, and yet they're openly exposed by a simple reading of the text.